Hello, my name is Oliver Bosch. I'm the founder of the Athlete's Mind, and today I'm talking with Samantha Livingstone, who was an Olympian previously. Now she's currently she currently founded an organization called the Livingstone High Performance and the Whole Athlete Initiative. And today I'm going to be asking Miss Livingstone a couple of questions related to her experience as an athlete, related to her work with mental health, and what exactly is she doing now. And to kind of like start off, my first question, can you just let us know who you are and a little bit more about your organization?
Yeah. So who am I? Which is such a loaded question.
Yeah.
But I would say how I answer that, I would say my like biggest role in my life right now is mother of four. I have four daughters and wife, sister, daughter, right? All those pieces. And then I would say like teacher slash mentor slash coach. And I run the vehicle that I use to do those things is through my own business, which is Livingstone High Performance. So it's a high performance consultancy. And I also do lots of work. So it's part of my business and how I serve. And I also do lots of work in the mental health advocacy space with the nonprofit Same Here Global, and do work in that way. And then I go out in the world and speak and do keynote speaking and share my story, the hard times, high times, all of it, and the things in between. So yeah, so that did that answer your question? Because I could talk probably for a long time. We'll keep it
Yeah.
short today. Yeah.
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 And can you just let us know, like, why exactly did you start your organization? Kind of like, what was
Yeah.
that reasoning?
Yeah. So why? I mean, my why is because I wish this support had existed when I was younger.
Mhm.
And so kind of there's two parts to the question. When I got to the top of the Olympic podium, I was 18. So
Mhm.
I just graduated high school, achieved my childhood dream, right? I've been dreaming about this moment for 10 years as a young athlete and achieved it. And I felt emptiness, which was not what I thought I would feel getting to the top of the podium. And I also felt pride, excitement, joy. And then there was this kind of like nagging emptiness of like, I did this thing, and yet it didn't feel as fulfilling as I thought it would. And what I know now is that what I was searching for was my worth as a person, which is something that we all have. And it's not tied to achievement, but that's really tricky in our world because that feels, we feel it in school, we can feel it at home, we sure as heck feel it in sport, that our worth kind of is hinged on what grades we get, where are we ranked, what school do we get into, where do we place. So as an adult, I went into teaching and coaching. That was my career path. So I was a high school science teacher. And I did not see myself doing what I'm doing today, right? So my second kind of moment that led me to this work was when my daughter, who was 1 year old at the time, needed open heart surgery. And there was this rumbling of control that I went through, right? Like she was in the hands of the physicians and her medical team. And I had to rumble with like, I can't just try harder to make all this better because there was moments where it got really tricky and she was fighting for her life. So coming out of that experience, now having been removed from the sport decades later, going, okay, I'm looking up and some of my peers were actually still competing, but I'm looking up and going like, what's changed? Like we're talking about mental health more, but where the teacher in me was like, where are we actually skilling up our young people with the tools that they need? Because every person on this planet is going to be navigating challenges internally. And so why aren't we talking about this? And so there's a story. It was this is not made up. Like I was sitting at my daughter's, all four of my daughters play hockey, and my oldest was young at the time and learning how to play. So they do a drill where they skate on the ice and then they slide on their bellies as fast as they can, like little superman. And then they get back up and they do it over and over. And at first I was like, what are they doing? And then I'm like, oh, they are purposely having them fall on the ice because they need to learn how to get up on the ice when they fall. So it's not a matter of if they'll ever fall, they're gonna fall because it's part of the game. How quickly can they get back up? And that was a moment for me where I was like, okay, why am I doing this? Because, I wish that I wish that we talked about the things that we still aren't talking about, right? Our emotions and being able to talk about self doubt, that all of us have that, and talk about these hard things in a way that normalizes it. And then the other piece is bringing the skills and tools to learn how to move through those things. So, yeah, so it's pretty intense why. And I'm very, very grateful that I had mentors. So after that podium moment, when I was navigating a pretty dark low, I was met by a mentor when I was at Michigan at the time, University of Michigan, Greg Harden, who, I work with him every week and he helped me. So he's been a huge force of inspiration, like for what he did with me then and the work that I'm bringing to others now. Yeah.
And just to kind of like go into that idea of like being on the podium and like, that's obviously like a huge aspiration of yours, but you didn't feel fulfilled. Why do you think that was? Was it just
Yeah.
like, was it like, what exactly do you think that was?
It is so much more common than people admit it is.
Yeah.
And it happens when you get into the dream school, you finally get there and it's like, oh, or that like chasing a particular GPA or rank, and it's like there are these moments, they're fleeting. And I think what happens for so many of us, and myself included, is that I really internalize the message of like, oh, if I'm perfect enough, if I achieve enough, like I'll be loved, like I'll finally feel enough. And that inner critic that I didn't know everyone has, like everyone has an inner critic. I didn't know that. It's like there are people that still don't know that. Like we all have an inner narrator, and sometimes that's mean to us. And usually it's meaner than other people, right, around us. So I think, and I like also welcome other people's, spins on this. It's like when our identity and worth becomes hinged in the performances, those moments get robbed. We are robbed of feeling the joy in that experience, the complete joy, because it's like it's just never enough. It's not going to fulfill us in the ways we're wanting to, because that's inside work. There's nothing out. There's no achievement, no amount of money in the bank, no job title that we could hold. It brings us like kind of a quick hit, and then we're left with that emptiness. And so one of the kind of tools that I teach that's fundamental, like, is that I really feel like if we go upstream, help young people understand and our worth. So if we do our two fists, right, like this, it's like this left hand fist represents who we are in the world, and we are enough as we are, right? That's not saying we're enough to get into Stanford, that our grades are enough to get into, come out to Harvard, or to finish first in our class, or make the roster spot. That's our achievement and performance, right? And sometimes we're going to bomb a test, and maybe we prepared, maybe we didn't, or we're going to fall short in some capacity. Or in a relationship, we're going to show up above the line. Maybe sometimes we don't. So this is how our behavior in the world, right? These things we achieve and things we don't, but this stays steady. So this left fist, this is our worth as a human. So, part of my fall after the podium was also I was navigating injury. All of a sudden, like, I'm injured and I can't swim, so I'm down here. That doesn't change my worth. But what happens for so many of us, and this for me too, and I still have to unhook, is that we are here. And one of the most pervasive kind of things in our culture is perfectionism. And that's this, that perfectionism is not striving for excellence, but that perfectionism is this. Like, if I just achieve enough, I'll finally feel like I'm enough, right? And it's born out of a fear of like, what will they think? Right. And will I be accepted? Do I belong? When what we want to do is come here and know, actually, I am loved and I am worthy and I am enough exactly as I am. And these are the things I want to try in life, right? And I might succeed, I might fall short. But when we're here, that podium moment, right? Like, it's like never enough, because there's always, even when you achieve, there's always something you could have done better, right? Like every race, every test, like, yeah, school, you can get 100%, but like, there's probably something you could have learned or shown, and done differently or better. And so if you're always like, if you're looking for if this is here, how we're measuring, if we're constantly looking at the ways we're falling short, but we're here, right? Like, we don't feel like we're enough. And so I think that's kind of how I've come to understand. And when I listen to other stories and I work with teams, and I have a huge, like, one whole foot inside of the space of psychology and neuroscience. It's like understanding how our brain works. And, I don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but understanding how we're wired as humans. We're wired to connect with the people that love us. And right. And so when we're here and feeling like our love is hinged on our achievements, it's a hard place to live. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of in that idea where you're trying so hard to kind of get to a specific place where you think like, oh my God, I'm going to try to do all these things.
Yeah.
And obviously it just isn't enough. Like as your time as an athlete, like how did that like kind of shape out? Like how much work were you doing per week in terms of training, things like that? Because obviously if you're trying to become an Olympian, it requires a lot of work.
Yeah.
And like with all that work that you did it kind of make you feel like upset that you spent that much time getting to maybe that like 15 minutes of satisfaction that just
Yeah.
one like how much work
Yeah.
was it and how did you feel?
So much work. So I this, no one's ever asked me this question. I love when I get asked new questions. It's, you can tell you put a lot of thought into it. So I wouldn't trade it. What I would, if I could go back in time, what I would do is help my younger self understand this concept, because I love working hard. Like I still do. And I love pushing the edge. Like the frustration, I don't love feeling frustrated, but that's part of growing. And the pain, like it's uncomfortable, but there's part of me that as an athlete, like I just loved that. I love being able to check a box and say like that practice, like, whoa, I didn't think I could do it and I did it. And so that part, all it's taken me until, I was an adult and kind of on the back end of my daughter's heart surgery and healing and learning these things. Like I wouldn't, like being able to separate that perfectionist piece from striving for excellence, like that striving for excellence, the 7 hours a day, all of that, like there was a huge piece of me that wanted to see how far I could go with curiosity and wonder. What happened was the perfectionism started to grow bigger than the wonder. So by the time I got to the podium, right, it was more of like a letdown. I'm still proud of it though. So kind of it's both are true. So that the training leading up to it, I graduated high school and I actually was like, I didn't do the traditional path. I took a year off because it was a year out from trials. So I stayed home with my club coach, went to community college classes, and I was working and training. But it was 6 days a week. And I would do 4 mornings in swimming. You train, like 6 days a week, multiple times a day. So I'd do 4 mornings of 2 hour blocks. Then for those 4 days, I would go to the gym, and that would be like the dry land session of like an hour, 2 hours. And then in the afternoons was 2 to 3 hours, the 5 days. So it was a lot of practices, a ton of time. And that, of course, huge sacrifices. So I would do all of it again. And what I wish I had known and I wish I'd been skilled up on is like, number one, that like this is hard and of course, you're going to experience these kinds of things, and that actually you're loved, period, and enough. And you don't need to go out to get to the top of the podium. And that's not going to quiet the inner critic. Right. So just wishing I had had those tools on board. But yeah, the work I still love. I don't think you can build a business. Entrepreneurship is definitely not for the faint of heart. So I don't think you could build a business without that same kind of tenacity and willingness to be uncomfortable and lean into hard things. So all that part, those parts of me still remain. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think because of the fact that, and you kind of mentioned injuries a little earlier after being like an Olympian, throughout your
Mhm.
athletic career, did you deal with any other notable injuries? And
Mhm.
obviously, because you're working so hard to get to that specific place and you're trying to kind of reach for that perfection per se,
Yeah.
how did that injury and having to stop your training, how did that
Yeah.
affect you mentally? Like, how did you
Yeah.
kind of stay?
So challenging. And I don't, yeah. So the pursuit of perfecting our craft, that pursuit of excellence, and like knowing that there's no such thing as perfect, but that kind of striving for excellence of craft is very different than trying to strive for perfection of self, right? That's kind of the same concept. So in the pursuit of like for pursuing excellence in sport and getting to that level, it was a huge setback, right? Like it was my shoulder and toward tendons. But I was, by the time that I knew what was happening and got a diagnosis, I was less than a year out from trials. And so I just managed it. And it wasn't an injury where it's sidelined, like it wasn't like a blown ACL where you just cannot continue to perform. So I managed, though I was in a lot of pain. But what happened is on the back end of that event, like just kind of the come down from anything that we're working for so long, coupled with transitioning off to college and not taking care of my body and not taking care of my shoulder in the ways that I had been. Yeah, I was out of the water for over a year and then started my recovery. And that was really humbling, right? At that point, I had been working with a mentor. He walked alongside of me for surgery. I was immobile, so put in a sling so my surgery was in November, and I did not get back in the water till April. So I was immobile for a huge chunk of that time, kind of just letting it sit to tighten back up. And starting as a swimmer volume wise, so you're doing like, you know, let's say 5 miles plus a day in the water. And I started at like 400 yards, barely, right? So you had to like go back to the beginning and start to build back. So that was a really long, challenging journey. The other thing that I had was right before trials, I finally worked my way back. So 2002, I was starting to swim again. 2003, I was competing at a higher level. By 2004, I had requalified for Olympic trials. I was back at the meet in great shape, racing well. And then I got sidelined with, I had cysts on one of my ovaries, which is like so random. And again, not really talked about a lot. Like at the time, I didn't tell anyone, but it pulled me from the water 4 weeks from the meet. And I was like, I am not going to, like, I'm going anyway. Right. So swam through that, but it was emotionally a pretty big blow. Right. Anytime we're injured, it's just kind of a shock to our system, especially as athletes, because we like being in control, and it's something that you can't control. You can control your response to. So that was hard. Coming back from those were my two kind of major ones that sidelined me out of the water. Yeah, and it's, I would say, like, when we're talking about mental health, injury, not only because of the emotional toll, but also when there's inflammation in the body, there's also inflammation, like our brain's part of our body. So there's also inflammation happening in our brain, which means we're going to have challenges with our mental health. Like that's real. And sometimes that slides into that space of mental illness. And I would say every athlete navigating injury, like talking to someone is so important because it's hard and it can feel really lonely. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to kind of like say if someone were to get injured, I remember I got injured earlier this season, and
Yeah.
we had an opportunity to win the state championship, and there's like a sense of guilt, not only because you're kind of letting down the team, but also like you want to get back in there. It's kind of tied with your identity, and that part is like stripped away. So if you are dealing with an injury, what would you say is kind of like the way you should approach it? Like, who should you ask for support? How should you approach it mentally? Kind of like things like that, or just like anything in terms of mental health. Like maybe you're not
Yeah.
feeling well. How should you deal with that in like a very healthy manner?
Yeah. That's such a great question. So the injury piece would be communicating to caregivers, like, and that might be tricky because there might be some pressure there from parents or caregivers at home. But being honest, and I think that's one of the hardest things because when you're honest, you're acknowledging like this is real versus like I'm just going to push through, I'm just going to push through, I'm just going to push through. And so coaches, I think, can be incredible supports. They can also, same thing, can also go the other way and be a source of pressure. And then so parents, and then a trusted peer, someone that you feel like you can actually be seen with, where you just say like, you don't need to fix it. I don't need you to change this. Like, I just need an ear. I just want to share, here's how I'm feeling. Can be really powerful. Physical therapists or athletic trainers are incredible sources of support, right? And then there are like system, like one of the offerings that I have in the world is a mentorship slash coach. And I'm not the only one who does this kind of work. So finding someone who, whether, so like in the coaching lane, who's a mental coach, mental health coach, mindfulness instructor, somebody that can be that safe space as you're moving through these different things. And not just that, but also one of the things I share with athletes who are navigating injury and we're kind of doing the work is like, there may be limitations physically with what they can do. So much we can build when it comes to mental strength while they're getting better physically, so that when they come back and they return to play, they're that much further along, right? Like that they've upped their game on that mental pillar front while they've been healing. So finding a trusted adult and a trusted peer to be able to talk to. Reading stories can also be really helpful. I remember reading Peekaboo Street's book. She was a skier, alpine racer who I loved growing up. And I just was reading about her. She had ACL repairs that she had to move through. And so it was like I found inspiration in hearing her journey kind of through the trenches and then getting back to racing. And I found inspiration in that too. So yeah. Yeah.
And I think you kind of like mentioned Greg Harding. I think someone who was, obviously a huge support for you after the Olympics when you were dealing with those mental struggles. What exactly were you doing with him that really helped you?
Oh, so many things. He introduced me to mindfulness. So that's one of my kind of hats I wear as mindfulness instructor, but he didn't call it that. It was just like helping me understand how to become an expert on myself as a human. And so actually he has a book that's out. It's right. I'll show it to you. It's called Staying Sane in an Insane World. And now appropriately that Michigan, I don't know. Are you a Michigan football fan?
I'm not. I watched the game though. He's
Okay.
definitely good.
Yeah. I mean, now, well, he's retired now, but so in his book, there's a chapter in the chapter that he wrote a chapter about our work together. And it's called, let me get the exact name. Your sport is what you do, not who you are. So like, I would say that that is absolutely the core essence of helping me understand that I'm a human who is striving in swimming, right? I'm a human who versus this is what I am and all of that I am. So he helped me really separate those two things and becoming a better person and working on myself in that inner world translated to sport, translated to every area of my life, right? Because a happier, healthier, more agile, not just physically, but emotionally and attentionally, as you are as a human, that has direct translation to the playing field.
Right. And because
Yeah.
we're like getting short on time right now.
Yeah.
So I would say like, what would you say if you are dealing like a lot with mental struggles during the time? What would you say you should like kind of be doing in your life that would be like the best in terms of just like what you should do as an individual, not only just like trying to find support, but maybe going outside a little more, maybe like mindfulness, things like that. What would you say is kind of like that best course of action?
Yeah. I think it depends on the person. They've got to find their tools. So I can share mine if that's helpful.
Yeah.
And ones that I've helped others, others have felt have been successful. So you say getting outside. So there's two parts to that: taking your shoes off and getting outside. So like it sounds wild, but it's a thing. And actually connecting to the earth. So even wherever you live, like some plot of soil, some plot of grass, like I'm looking out. We live on a mountain, so it's quite easy. I say that someone that's privileged to have nature so close, but being able to be outside and putting your feet on the ground and being connected, being in nature, going on nature walks. There's a team of high school guys that I work with, and they joke about it. Like, we're going on a nature walk. You know what, though? They start laughing, but they're like, no, it really works. Like, it actually really works. And it's like, it does really work. So, getting outside every day, if possible, even if it's just for 5 minutes, feet on the ground if you can, and then being able to start a gratitude, like not just making a list just to make a list one time, but actually like at some point throughout the day connecting and like naming something that you're feeling grateful for. So another team that I work with, their practice, there's a couple of the athletes on the team that will text each other, like 3 things that they're feeling really grateful for that day. It's just a way to end the night. So it's like, these are my 3 things. What are your 3 things? And having that accountability and checking in. And then I would say being able to meet ourselves with kindness. So knowing that every human navigates struggle. And so that when we start to believe the lies that like, oh, that they have it all together or they don't struggle, it's like actually every single human on the planet, 5 of us will navigate these challenges. And so when we're able to meet ourselves with kindness and a curiosity of like, what is it my body's needing? It might be the kind of core basics of, did I hydrate enough today? Because that'll alter our mood. Am I eating enough food and nutrients and fueling well? Because that is a massive part. If we don't have the energy, we can't build the neurotransmitters that help us feel good. So I would say hydration, fuel, sleep, and then starting to pay attention to things like, oh, like energetically, like, am I feeling so low after I'm on TikTok or snapping? Like, and like, what do I need to do? So instead of a huge part of I find what's really important is like centering young people's voices. So I would turn it, I bet you could make a list of things that that would help you feel better. So it becomes like tuning in and getting curious about, okay, I know these things will help me feel better. So what's stopping me from doing them? Okay, how can I set myself up to do those a little bit better or move toward them versus having one more adult say, hey, you need to do X, Y, Z, right? So coming to the basics of nourishing, hydrating, sleeping well, and then figuring out, okay, get outside in nature, I love different breathing practices or music, like finding that thing that allows you to kind of come back to yourself without all the input of the world, just to check in with like, how am I doing and what am I needing? And then going from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like really valuable advice, and I definitely take it myself. But yeah, I mean that's mostly what I had in terms of questions. So there's
Do you have
nothing
any more? I'll stretch. My kids can wait
a
for me.
little bit. Okay.
Okay.
I didn't have too many other ones. I was gonna really just talk a little bit more because I was focusing more on the injuries aspect, but
Mhm.
was there also an aspect where you just didn't perform as well as you wanted to back
Oh yeah.
and like exactly like a lot of times I feel like with those performance aspects, it's like a month where you're just like not performing as well, and it feels like you're kind of in the slumps, you're plateauing in a sense, and then maybe that one race you magically do well, and you kind of get like that confidence again. But how do you think you should deal it with like kind of not performing to the point you want to be at or the standard?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Comes back to this core concept.
right,
So if we're not performing well and our identity is wrapped in that, we are going to feel awful and it's going to take us down and it's going to suck our confidence out because we're not going to feel like we're enough. We're not doing enough. And when we're in this space, like a little bit of anatomy and physiology lesson here, our brain detects threat. And so we come offline. So all of our ability to think logically and be like, oh, it's just this window of time goes right out the window and it feels so big. It feels like it's going to last forever and we're never going to get to where we want to go. And then it feels like everyone around us is doing well, but why aren't we? It makes us question things. We become very dysregulated and spinny inside. So when we're in those pockets, I would come back to like like HALT is an acronym. So like, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Like basics of the body. Maybe we're in a stretch where we're just not nourishing well or hydrating well or sleeping well. Maybe it's exam week at school or APs are crushing us or what are the other contributing factors and stressors in my life that maybe would make this make sense. So we kind of just kind of curiosity first. And then when our fists are separate, we go, okay, well, yeah, I'm not like, it's just not like, I'm not performing the way that I want to be. And so asking and pulling people in around like, coach, like, are you seeing anything? And being open to that feedback. Maybe it's a trusted adult. Maybe it's a parent. I don't know how mixed those worlds, like if it's an unhealthy relationship, you don't want to pull them in when it comes to performance. But the other part is the concept of the compound effect. Are you familiar with that?
yeah,
Okay. This simple book. He's the editor of Success Magazine, Darren Hardy. And it's like, if I said to you, I'm going to give you $5 million cash or a penny that doubles in value every day for 30 days, what are you taking?
probably $5 million.
Right. I mean, why wouldn't you, right? Because a penny, 1 single cent that doubles in value every day for 30 days. If I took the penny and you took the 5 million on day 27, you'd be like, okay, but you'd be looking at my pile of cash getting pretty big. So 16 days in, you're sitting pretty, I don't know the exact number, but I'm like less than $1,000 or something like that, right? By the 30th day, when it doubles in value, I'm now at 10 million.
Right.
It's this idea of that, like in school, right? The exponential growth curve of like these small deposits that we're making seemingly insignificant decisions. So while our performance might not be there and it's not where we want it to be, can we at the end of our day look at the body of work and go, okay, here's what I know I did well today. This, and this, got this done, hydrated well, nourished well, sleeping well, put these deposits in at practice. So those are the small deposits, like that penny doubling in value every day for 30 days. And you're going to hit the growth. It's just, it's there, it's building, it's coming, but we've got to trust that process of putting in those deposits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's kind of like not only looking towards the positives, but understanding that if you are doing those things and if you are consistently doing those things, it will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something true. My coach tells me that all the time.
It's hard though. It's not how you're, and especially hard. I graduated college right when the cell phone was coming out. Like you've been born and immersed in this world, and I'm not gonna like judge it. It just is. You are used to, and your brain is conditioned to get instant gratification.
Right,
It is a skill you've got to train for that delayed gratification. Like that's not part of your world. So in this way, it is, right? In tests and online, like all the things, like so much. So think about that, right? So you've got to build that mental muscle of patience. Yeah, not easy.
And that's why I really like sports. I think it just like teaches you so much about those things and at such a young age and being able to kind of like carry that out in the future. So, but yeah, that was kind of like all my questions. I don't know if
Awesome.
like anything else you wanted to talk about, but
No, fantastic questions.
yeah,
Nice job.
thank you so much. But yeah, so thank you so much. I'm gonna just stop the recording now.
Yeah.
Um,